The grand ballroom of the Silvercrest Palace glittered like a jewel box tipped on its side, all that wealth and beauty spilling across marble floors in waves of silk and laughter. Lord Kazimir stood in the shadows of the upper gallery, watching the humans dance their elaborate patterns below. He had taken the form they would find least threatening tonight, a tall nobleman with dark hair swept back from a face that was handsome enough to be memorable, but not so striking as to draw constant attention. His clothes were impeccable, tailored in the latest fashion from the capital, dark fabrics that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He had no particular reason to be here. The invitation that granted him entry had been stolen from a marquis who would spend the evening unconscious in his own wine cellar, none the worse for wear except for a headache in the morning and a gap in his memory. Kazimir had simply been curious. 300 years of existence had taught him that human celebrations were often more revealing than their wars, and he made it his business to understand the creatures who lived such brief, bright lives in the lands that bordered his domain. The ball was being held in honor of some diplomatic arrangement, a betrothal between noble houses that would unite two provinces. Kazimir cared nothing for their politics, but he appreciated the spectacle. The musicians were talented, the refreshments were surely poisonously sweet, and the dancers moved with the careful precision of people who knew they were being watched and judged. He was about to leave, having seen enough to satisfy his idle curiosity, when a disturbance near the main entrance caught his attention. The laughter started as a ripple, a few voices that tried and failed to maintain decorum. Then it spread like spilled wine across a tablecloth, staining everything it touched. Heads turned. The music faltered for half a beat before the musicians, trained professionals all, recovered and continued playing. But the damage was done. Every eye in the ballroom had turned to see what had provoked such a reaction. Kazimir leaned forward slightly, his interest genuinely piqued now. The woman who had just entered the ballroom stood frozen in the doorway, one hand still resting on the ornate frame as if she might bolt back through it at any moment. She was not what these people would call beautiful, not by the standards that governed their narrow aesthetic judgments. She was plump, generously curved in an era that prized willowy slenderness. Her face was round and soft, with full cheeks that had gone bright red with embarrassment. Her hair had been arranged in an attempt at the current fashion, but was already escaping its pins in defiant curls. But it was her dress that had provoked the laughter. Kazimir, who had seen the fashions of a dozen human kingdoms rise and fall like tides, recognized it immediately. The gown had been made in a style that was perhaps 20 years out of date, with a fuller skirt and a different cut to the bodice than what was currently worn. The fabric was good quality but not expensive, likely the best her family could afford. Someone had tried to update it with new trim and ribbons, but the effort only highlighted how fundamentally different it was from the confections of silk and gossamer that floated around the ballroom. She looked, Kazimir thought, like a merchant's daughter who had been invited out of obligation and had tried her very best to belong. The laughter grew louder. A young woman near the refreshment table leaned close to her companion and whispered something that made them both dissolve into giggles. A man in a military uniform raised his glass toward the newcomer in a mocking salute. Even the servants, standing at attention along the walls, allowed themselves small smirks. The woman in the doorway seemed to shrink into herself. Her hand fell from the doorframe. She took one step backward, clearly preparing to flee. Kazimir found himself moving before he had consciously decided to do so. He descended from the gallery, using the servant stair, moving with inhuman speed through the corridors he had memorized upon entering the palace. Demons were nothing if not thorough in unfamiliar territory. He emerged into the ballroom proper through a side entrance, already walking with the confident stride of someone who belonged, someone whose presence could not be questioned. The woman had not fled yet, though she looked like a rabbit caught in torchlight, every muscle tensed for escape. She had been intercepted by two young ladies dressed in matching shades of pink, their faces arranged in expressions of false sympathy that poorly concealed their cruel amusement. "My dear," one of them was saying as Kazimir drew close enough to hear, "wherever did you find such? Charming gown. I don't believe I've seen anything quite like it." "It was my mother's," the woman said quietly, and Kazimir could hear the tremor in her voice that she was fighting to control. "She altered it for me." "How economical," the second pink-clad lady said, and they both dissolved into laughter again. Kazimir had killed men for far less than this. He had raised villages that dared to mock those under his protection. But he was not in his kingdom now, and wholesale slaughter was generally frowned upon at diplomatic functions. Even he knew that. So instead, he drew upon 3 centuries of courtly training, some of it from human courts, some from far older and stranger places, and stepped directly into their conversation. "There you are," he said, speaking to the woman in the outdated dress as if she were the only person in the room. "I've been waiting for you." All 3 women turned to stare at him. Kazimir was accustomed to being stared at. He cut an impressive figure when he chose to, and tonight he had chosen to very deliberately. He ignored the 2 in pink entirely, keeping his eyes fixed on the woman they had been tormenting. Up close, he could see more details. Her eyes were a warm brown, currently wide with confusion and the shine of tears she was too proud to let fall. She had a light dusting of freckles across her nose that someone had tried to powder over. Her hands, he noticed, were work-roughened, not the soft, pampered hands of a lady who had never done anything more strenuous than lift a teacup. She started, clearly about to tell him he was mistaken. "Surely you haven't forgotten," Kazimir said smoothly, and he allowed just a touch of his true nature to bleed into his voice. It was a small magic, a minor compulsion, but it was enough. The 2 women in pink suddenly found themselves very interested in being somewhere else. They drifted away without another word, leaving Kazimir alone with the woman whose name he didn't even know. She looked up at him with those wide brown eyes, and he could see the exact moment when she decided he was real and not a figment of her desperate imagination. "I don't know you," she whispered. "No," Kazimir agreed. "But you looked like you could use a rescue, and I have always had a weakness for damsels in distress, though I should warn you that I'm not precisely a knight in shining armor." "I'm not a damsel," she said, and there was a spark of spirit in her voice that pleased him. I shouldn't have come. This was a mistake." "Perhaps," Kazimir said. "Or perhaps everyone else in this room is making a mistake. That seems equally likely, don't you think?" She blinked at him, clearly trying to determine if he was mocking her as the others had been. He could see the moment when she decided he was serious, or at least not cruel. Some of the tension left her shoulders. "That's kind of you to say, my lord, but—" "Kazimir," he interrupted. "And I am many things, but kind is rarely one of them. I'm simply stating a fact. This room is full of fools who wouldn't recognize true value if it struck them in their powdered faces." The corner of her mouth twitched in what might have become a smile. "You're very confident in that assessment." "I'm very old," Kazimir said, which was true, though he softened it with a smile. "I've learned to trust my judgment." The music swelled around them. Couples were taking to the floor for the next dance, a waltz if his ears didn't deceive him. Kazimir extended his hand to her, palm up, an invitation. "Dance with me," he said. It was not quite a command, but it was not quite a request either. She stared at his hand as if it were a serpent that might strike. "Everyone is watching," she said quietly. "Yes," Kazimir agreed. "They are, so give them something worth watching." She looked up at him again, searching his face for something. He didn't know what she found there, certainly not the truth of what he was, or she would have run screaming. But whatever she saw, it was enough. She placed her hand in his. Her palm was warm and slightly damp with nervous perspiration. He could feel her pulse racing through the delicate bones of her wrist. Kazimir led her out onto the dance floor with absolute confidence, and the crowd parted before them like water before the prow of a ship. The moment Kasimir's hand settled at her waist, he felt her stiffen. She was terrified, he realized, not of him specifically, but of the hundreds of eyes that watched them take their position on the dance floor. The music began, and he gave her no time to reconsider, sweeping her into the first turn of the waltz with a confidence that left her no choice but to follow. "You do know how to dance," he observed after a moment. Despite her obvious fear, her steps were sure, her posture correct. Someone had trained her properly. "My mother insisted I learn," she said, her voice barely audible over the music. "She said every lady should know the graces, even if—" She trailed off, but Kazimir could complete the thought. "Even if we can never afford the places where such graces matter." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," he said, guiding her through a turn that brought them past a cluster of nobles who had stopped their own dancing to stare. He met their gazes with a cool indifference that sent them scurrying back to their own partners. "Though I question her taste in social events, this particular ball seems to be populated primarily by peacocks and vipers." That startled a laugh out of her, quickly stifled. "You shouldn't say such things. These are important people." "Importance is a matter of perspective," Kazimir replied. "That woman there in the green, for instance, Lady Clarice of Westmark, she's important by your standards, I suppose. Married to a minor lord with an ancient name and declining fortunes. She maintains her position through careful flattery and a willingness to overlook her husband's affairs." He spun them past another couple. "And that gentleman, Lord Pemberton, accumulated his wealth through contracts supplying the army with grain during the last war. Most of it was moldy, but he had the right connections to avoid prosecution." She was staring at him now, momentarily forgetting to be self-conscious. "How do you know all that?" "I pay attention," Kazimir said simply. "And I've found that important people are often important for the least important reasons." They danced in silence for a few measures, and Kazimir found himself studying her face. The blush had faded from her cheeks, replaced by something more complicated, confusion mixed with a cautious curiosity. She was still tense in his arms, but no longer quite so frightened. "You never told me your name," he said. She hesitated, and he could almost see her weighing the social calculus. She had already danced with him, already been seen by everyone who mattered. What harm could her name do now? "Rosalind," she said finally. "Rosalind Thorne. My father is Edmund Thorne of the Merchants' Guild." "A merchant's daughter," Kazimir said, and he watched her flinch slightly, expecting mockery. "That explains the practical hands and the excellent posture. Merchant children are usually better educated than half the nobility, in my experience. They have to actually know things rather than simply relying on their bloodlines." Rosalind's eyes widened slightly. "You really aren't like the others here, are you?" "No," Kazimir agreed. "I am very much not like the others here." He saw her gaze flick over his shoulder, and her expression tightened. Following her line of sight, he spotted a young man watching them with undisguised hostility. The man was handsome in a conventional way, with golden hair and the kind of build that came from regular sword practice and no real labor. His clothes marked him as nobility, and the way he stared at Rosalind suggested a personal grievance. "Someone you know?" Kazimir asked mildly. Rosalind's steps faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Lord Julian Hartwick," she said quietly. "He's the reason I'm here, actually. Our families have been negotiating a potential marriage arrangement." Something cold and sharp settled in Kasimir's chest, though he kept his expression neutral. "I see. And does the potential groom know you're being courted?" "It's not really courting," Rosalind said, and there was a bitter edge to her voice now. "It's a business arrangement. My father's money for his family's name and connections. I thought—" She paused, swallowing hard. I thought if I came tonight, if I made an effort to fit in, perhaps it wouldn't be so terrible. Perhaps we could at least be civil to one another. But instead, he's standing there glowering while everyone mocked you, and he did nothing, Kazimir said flatly. Rosalind said nothing, which was answer enough. The music was building toward its conclusion. Kazimir made a decision that he would probably regret, but found he didn't particularly care about. He had lived for 3 centuries, and one thing he had learned was that life was far too short, even his life, to tolerate watching cruelty go unanswered. "Tell me, Rosalind Thorne," he said as they moved through the final measures of the dance, "what would you do if you didn't have to marry for your family's ambitions?" She looked at him as if he'd asked her to explain the nature of the stars. It's not a question that matters. We all have duties. Humor me." The music ended. They came to a stop, but Kazimir didn't release her hand. Around them, couples were separating, the gentlemen bowing, the ladies curtsying, all performing the elaborate ritual of polite society. Kazimir ignored all of it, keeping his eyes fixed on Rosalind. "I would travel," she said finally, so quietly he had to strain to hear. "I've read about other places, other lands. The great libraries of Ashara, the floating markets of Shendori, the crystal caves beneath the frost-spine mountains. I would see things that most people only dream about." "Then you have the soul of an explorer," Kazimir said. "That's far more valuable than the ability to match ribbons to slippers, don't you think?" Before she could answer, Lord Julian Hartwick appeared at her elbow. Up close, Kazimir could smell the wine on his breath and see the flush of anger and alcohol on his cheeks. "Rosalind," Julian said, not even glancing at Kazimir. "You're needed. Your father wishes to speak with you." It was a lie, and not even a particularly good one. Kazimir could see the calculation in the young lord's eyes, the desire to remove Rosalind from the dance floor and away from the attention Kazimir had brought her. Rosalind saw it too. Kazimir watched the conflict play across her face, the ingrained habit of obedience warring with something newer and more defiant. "I'm conversing with Lord Kazimir," she said, and Kazimir felt a surge of satisfaction at the steel in her voice. Julian finally looked at him, really looked at him, and Kazimir allowed just a fraction of his true nature to show. Nothing obvious, nothing that would cause a scene. Just a subtle wrongness in his eyes, a suggestion of something ancient and dangerous wearing human skin. The young lord took an involuntary step backward. "I'm certain her father can wait a few more minutes," Kazimir said pleasantly. "Unless it's truly urgent, a matter of life and death, perhaps." "No," Julian said, the word coming out strangled. "No, it can. It can wait." "Wonderful," Kazimir said. He turned back to Rosalind and did something he had not planned, something that surprised even himself. He raised her hand to his lips, but instead of the perfunctory air kiss that was customary, he pressed a real kiss to her knuckles, his lips warm against her skin. The ballroom, which had been humming with resumed conversation, went silent again. Kazimir lowered her hand but didn't release it. "Walk with me," he said. "The gardens here are supposed to be quite spectacular." Rosalind nodded mutely, and Kazimir led her toward the glass doors that opened onto the terrace, leaving Lord Julian Hartwick standing alone on the dance floor, staring after them with an expression of impotent fury. The night air was cool and welcome after the stuffy heat of the ballroom. The palace gardens stretched out before them, illuminated by enchanted lanterns that floated among the trees like captive stars. Kazimir guided Rosalind down a path lined with night-blooming flowers that released their perfume into the darkness. They walked in silence for a while, leaving the noise of the ball behind them. When Kazimir judged they were far enough away to avoid being overheard, he stopped beside a fountain where water cascaded over carved stone angels. "You should know," he said, "that I am not a lord, not in the way they understand it. Rosalind tilted her head, studying him in the soft light of the floating lanterns. What are you then? Something else entirely, Kazimir said. He waited for the fear, the revulsion, but all he saw in her face was curiosity. Are you going to tell me what that means? He smiled despite himself. Perhaps, but first I have a question. That marriage arrangement with the charming Lord Hartwick, is the contract signed? No, Rosalind said slowly. The negotiations are still ongoing. My father is practical. He won't finalize anything until he's certain of the terms. Why? Because I'm about to make those negotiations considerably more complicated, Kazimir said. If you'll allow me. Rosalind wrapped her arms around herself, though whether from cold or something else, he couldn't tell. I don't understand. I'm going to make you an offer, Rosalind Thorne, Kazimir said. And unlike most of the offers you've probably received in your life, this one has no obligations attached. You may refuse it without consequence. What kind of offer? Kazimir turned to face her fully. Come with me. Leave this place, these people who look at you and see only a merchant's gold or a marriage contract. See the things you spoke of, the libraries and the markets and the crystal caves. I can show you wonders that most humans never dream exist. She stared at him. You're mad, I can't just leave, my family, my responsibilities. Your family wants you to marry a man who stood by and watched you be humiliated, Kazimir said, and there was an edge to his voice now. Your responsibilities are to live a life that makes you miserable for the sake of social advancement that won't even benefit you, only your father's business interests. Tell me, Rosalind, what do they offer you in return? Rosalind turned away from him, moving to the edge of the fountain where she could trail her fingers in the cool water. The floating lanterns cast shifting patterns of light and shadow across her face, and Kazimir waited, giving her time to think. He had learned patience over his long existence, learned that the most important decisions could not be rushed. You don't know anything about my life, she said finally, but there was no real heat in the words. You don't know what I owe my family. Then tell me, Kazimir said simply. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, but he was careful not to crowd her. I have time. The night is young, and I find I'm genuinely curious. She laughed, a small, sad sound. Why? Why do you care about any of this? You could have any woman in that ballroom. I saw how they looked at you when we were dancing. Lady Clarice looked ready to abandon her husband on the spot. Lady Clarice is a bore who thinks only of status and gossip, Kazimir said. Whereas you dream of crystal caves and distant libraries. I know which I find more interesting. Rosalind looked at him, searching his face for mockery and finding none. She sighed, her breath misting slightly in the cool air. My mother was a seamstress, she said. A very talented one, but still a woman who worked with her hands. My father was already established in the guild when he met her, but he wasn't wealthy, not yet. They married for love, which everyone told them was foolish. She paused, gathering her thoughts, and Kazimir waited. My father worked himself half to death building his business. He wanted to give my mother everything she'd never had, a fine house, servants, security. He wanted me to have the opportunities that came with wealth. When my mother became ill 5 years ago, he spent a fortune on physicians and healers. Nothing helped. She died anyway. I'm sorry, Kazimir said, and meant it. He knew something of loss, though his losses were measured in centuries rather than years. Rosalind nodded, accepting his sympathy. Before she died, she made my father promise that he would see me well settled. Not just married, but married into nobility, given the kind of life she'd always dreamed about. She wanted me to be a lady, to never have to work as she did, to never worry about money or security. And so your father negotiates with families like the Hartwicks, Kazimir said. Yes, he thinks he's honoring her wishes. He thinks he's giving me what she wanted. Rosalind's voice cracked slightly. He doesn't understand that what she really wanted was for me to be happy. She used to tell me stories about faraway places, show me pictures in books. She's the one who taught me to dream. And now you're trapped by her dying wish twisted into something she never intended, Kazimir said. Rosalind pulled her hand from the water, watching droplets fall from her fingers like small diamonds in the lantern light. It's not a trap. It's duty, family, love. You don't just abandon those things because they're difficult. No, Kazimir agreed. But you also don't sacrifice your entire existence to a promise that was made with love but has been corrupted into something else. Tell me truly, Rosalind, do you think your mother would be happy seeing you miserable with Julian Hartwick? No, she whispered. But what choice do I have? If I refuse this match, there will be others just like it. My father won't stop until I'm married to someone with a title. And if I run away, if I disgrace him, it will destroy everything he's built. The other merchants won't work with a man who can't control his own daughter. His business will suffer. People who depend on him for their livelihoods will be hurt. Kazimir was silent for a long moment. The weight of obligation, the chains of love and duty, these were things he understood better than she might guess. He had his own kingdom, his own responsibilities, though she didn't know it yet. What if there was a way to give your father what he wants without sacrificing yourself? He said finally. She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Your father wants you married to nobility, wants the connections and status that brings. What if you could give him that, but on your own terms? Rosalind shook her head. I don't understand. What nobleman would marry me on my terms? They're all like Julian, looking for money and expecting total obedience in return. Not all of them, Kazimir said quietly. He reached into his coat and withdrew a ring he had worn for longer than this kingdom had existed. It was a simple band of dark metal that seemed to absorb light, set with a single stone that gleamed red as heart's blood. I told you I wasn't a lord in the way they understand it. That's true. I am something else, something older and considerably more powerful. He held the ring between them, and as he focused his will, it began to emit a faint glow. Rosalind gasped, taking a step back. I am Kazimir, lord of the Obsidian Reaches, sovereign of the territories that lie beyond the Shadow Peak Mountains. In the human tongue, you would call me a demon lord. He waited for her to scream, to run, to do any of the sensible things a human should do when confronted with such a truth. Instead, Rosalind stared at him with those wide brown eyes, and then, incredibly, she laughed. That's impossible, she said. Demon lords are stories to frighten children. They're not real, and they certainly don't attend balls at the Silvercrest Palace. And yet here I am, Kazimir said, attending a ball and finding the entire affair rather tedious until you arrived. The ring's glow intensified, and this time there was no denying what she was seeing. The light cast strange shadows, and in those shadows, Rosalind could catch glimpses of his true form, something taller, darker, with eyes that burned like coals. She should have been terrified. Every instinct bred into humanity over countless generations should have been screaming at her to flee. Instead, she took a step closer, peering at him with a scholar's curiosity. You're serious, she said wonderingly. You're actually serious. I am many things, but rarely dishonest, Kazimir replied. He allowed the display to fade, resuming his fully human appearance. At least, not about important matters. Court politics and stolen invitations are another matter entirely. Why tell me this? Rosalind asked. Why reveal yourself? Because I'm about to offer you a marriage contract, Kazimir said. And unlike your father's negotiations with the Hartwicks, I believe you deserve to know exactly what you'd be agreeing to. The words hung in the cool night air between them. A nightingale sang somewhere in the gardens, its melody achingly beautiful. Rosalind sat down abruptly on the edge of the fountain, as if her legs would no longer support her. You want to marry me, she said flatly. A demon lord wants to marry a merchant's daughter from Silvercrest. This is madness. Probably, Kazimir agreed. He sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. But consider the advantages. Your father gets a son-in-law with a title far more ancient and powerful than any minor nobleman. The Obsidian Reaches, while not part of the human kingdoms, are wealthy beyond measure. You would never lack for anything material. And the disadvantages? Rosalind asked. Living in a demon realm, married to a demon lord, I assume there are some fairly significant disadvantages. Kazimir smiled despite himself. Most humans would still be fixated on the impossibility of his existence, but Rosalind had moved directly to practical considerations. He liked that about her. The Obsidian Reaches are not what human stories paint them to be, he said. My people are not monsters, though we are different from humans. The realm itself is beautiful in ways that human lands are not, darker perhaps, but no less wondrous. As for being married to me, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I would not demand love from you, Rosalind. I would not even demand affection. What I offer is a partnership. Your companionship and presence, in exchange for protection, freedom to pursue your interests, and the opportunity to see those wonders you dream about. Why, she asked bluntly. Why me? You could have anyone. Because you're kind, Kazimir said simply. I saw the way you spoke to those women who mocked you. You were humiliated and hurt, but when I appeared, you didn't use me as a weapon against them. You didn't demand that I punish them or put them in their place. And because you're curious and intelligent and brave enough to sit here discussing marriage contracts with a demon lord instead of fainting or fleeing. He stood, offering her his hand. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm not even asking you to take the offer seriously. All I'm asking is that you consider it. Consider that there might be a path forward that doesn't require you to sacrifice everything you are for the sake of a promise that was meant with love, but has become a cage. Rosalind looked at his extended hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she placed her palm in his and let him help her to her feet. This is insane, she said. Yes, Kazimir agreed. My father would never agree. Your father would be a fool to refuse an alliance with the Obsidian Reaches. I can be very persuasive when I choose to be. I don't even know you. Then get to know me, Kazimir said. I'll be in Silvercrest for the next 3 days. Meet with me, ask your questions. Learn what you need to learn to make an informed decision. Rosalind was silent, and he could see the thoughts racing behind her eyes, weighing possibilities, calculating risks. Finally, she nodded. 3 days, she said. After that, I'll give you my answer. That's all I ask, Kazimir said. They stood there in the garden, hands still clasped, and overhead the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, uncaring of the strange bargain being struck in the shadows below. The following morning, Rosalind woke in her bedroom in her father's house to find a box on her windowsill that definitely had not been there when she went to sleep. The wood was dark as midnight and warm to the touch, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. She knew without opening it who had left it there. Inside, nestled in velvet the color of twilight, was a book. The cover was leather, supple and rich, and when she opened it, the pages within were filled with images that moved. She saw the great library of Ashara as if she were standing in it, shelves that stretched toward impossibly high ceilings, shafts of golden light illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny stars. Turning the page, she saw the floating markets of Shendori, boats laden with exotic goods drifting on turquoise water, vendors calling out in musical languages she didn't understand. Each page was a window into another place, another wonder. The crystal caves she had mentioned gleamed with formations that pulsed with inner light. Mountain ranges she had no name for stretched toward skies of colors she had never seen. And woven through it all, appearing here and there in the scenes, was Kazimir, standing on a balcony overlooking a city of golden towers, walking through a forest where the trees had silver leaves, watching a sunset over an ocean that burned with crimson light. It was a promise made tangible. See, the book said, all of this could be yours. There was a note tucked into the back, written in an elegant hand that matched the antique style she had seen in museum pieces. Meet me at the Laughing Crow Tavern at noon. Come alone or bring a companion if it makes you feel safer. I have nothing to hide from you, Rosalind Thorne. She spent the morning in a state of distraction that her father noticed, but attributed to the previous night's ball. She had returned home late, entering through the servant's door that her father had ensured she had a key to. He had still been awake, waiting up despite the hour, eager to hear how the evening had gone. Rosalind had told him a carefully edited version of the truth. She had danced with several gentlemen, including Lord Julian Hartwick. There had been a very distinguished visitor, a lord from distant lands. No, she didn't think Julian would be proposing immediately. These things took time. What she hadn't told him was that Julian had cornered her near the end of the evening, after Kazimir had escorted her back inside. The young lord had been drunk and angry, accusing her of making a spectacle of herself, of embarrassing him in front of his peers. He had grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises and told her that when they were married, she would learn proper obedience. Kazimir had appeared out of nowhere, moving with that impossible speed she now understood was not entirely human. He had removed Julian's hand from her arm with a grip that made the young lord go white with pain, and spoken a single sentence in a language Rosalind didn't recognize. Whatever he said had sent Julian fleeing into the night. He won't bother you again, Kazimir had told her. Not ever, that much I can promise you. Now, sitting in her room with the impossible book in her lap, Rosalind made her decision. She dressed carefully in a simple day dress, told her father's housekeeper she was going shopping, and made her way through Silvercrest's winding streets to the Laughing Crow. The tavern was a respectable establishment in the merchant quarter, the kind of place where business was conducted over lunch and the wine was good without being ostentatious. Kazimir was waiting for her in a private room, and when she entered, he stood and bowed with a grace that belonged to a different century. You came, he said, and she could hear the genuine pleasure in his voice. I received your gift, Rosalind said, taking the seat across from him. It's beautiful and absolutely terrifying. Terrifying. Because it makes me want things I have no right to want, she said honestly. Because it makes the life my father has planned for me look like a prison by comparison. Kazimir poured her a glass of wine from the bottle on the table. You have every right to want a life of wonder and discovery, Rosalind. The fact that you were born into circumstances that tried to deny you that right doesn't make the wanting wrong. They talked for hours. Rosalind asked questions about his realm, his people, what being married to a demon lord would actually entail. Kazimir answered with an honesty that was sometimes uncomfortable, but never less than truthful. My people will be curious about you, he said. Some will be welcoming, some skeptical. You would be the first human to hold the position of consort in my court. That would come with challenges. Would I be in danger? Not from my people, not once they understood you were under my protection. That protection is absolute. His eyes darkened slightly. From others outside my realm, perhaps. I have enemies as anyone with power does, but I would never allow harm to come to you. What would you expect from me? Rosalind asked. You said you wouldn't demand love or affection, but surely you'd expect something. Kazimir considered this. Honesty, he said finally. Companionship when you were willing to give it. Respect which I would offer you in return. As for the more intimate aspects of marriage, that would be entirely at your discretion. I have lived 300 years, Rosalind. I have learned patience. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to hold his gaze. And if I never wanted that aspect of marriage? Then we would have a partnership of minds and mutual interest rather than flesh, Kazimir said with a shrug. I would be disappointed, perhaps. I find you more captivating than I expected, but I would honor your wishes. Unlike the Julian Hartwicks of the world, I understand that consent is not a one-time transaction completed at the altar. Rosalind found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the conversation. There was something deeply reassuring about Kazimir's straightforward manner, his refusal to dissemble or make promises he couldn't keep. "Tell me about your enemies," she said. "If I'm going to make an informed decision, I should know what threats I might face." So he told her about the neighboring demon lords who sometimes tested his borders, though none had dared open conflict in decades. About the human kingdoms that feared what they didn't understand and occasionally sent heroes or armies to try to cleanse the so-called evil from the obsidian reaches. About the ancient things that dwelled in the deep places of the world and sometimes stirred in their sleep. "It sounds dangerous," Rosalind said. "Living is dangerous," Kazimir replied. "Your own world is full of threats, disease, violence, the cruelty of people like those at the ball last night. At least in my realm, the dangers are honest. A demon who dislikes you will challenge you openly. There's something refreshing about that compared to human society, where they smile to your face and destroy you with whispers behind your back." Rosalind couldn't argue with that. They ordered lunch, and the conversation turned to lighter topics. Kazimir told her stories of his travels, of the ridiculous things he had seen humans do in pursuit of power or love or glory. Rosalind found herself laughing, genuinely laughing, in a way she hadn't since her mother died. "What made you attend the ball?" she asked during a lull in the conversation. "You said you had no real reason to be there." "Curiosity," Kazimir said. "I wanted to see how the current crop of nobility entertained themselves. I was about to leave, actually, when you arrived. And you decided to rescue me instead. Why?" He was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. "Because I saw myself in you," he said finally. "I was not born to power, Rosalind. I won my position through strength and cunning and the willingness to do what others would not. But before that, I was just another demon, unremarkable and unremarked upon. I know what it is to be overlooked, dismissed as insignificant. I know what it is to walk into a room and see contempt in the eyes of those who think themselves better. And now I am powerful enough that no one dares show me contempt," Kazimir said. "But I remember. And when I saw you standing in that doorway, saw the cruelty in their laughter, something in me demanded that I intervene." Rosalind reached across the table and took his hand. It was an impulsive gesture, but she didn't regret it. His skin was warm, more human than she expected. "Thank you," she said simply. "You haven't given me your answer yet," Kazimir pointed out, but he didn't pull his hand away. "No," Rosalind agreed. "I need to speak to my father first. He deserves to hear the truth from me." "Would you like me to be there?" She considered this. "Yes," she said finally. "I think that would be best. He'll have questions that only you can answer." That evening, in the study of Edmund Thorne's comfortable home, Rosalind sat with her father and told him everything. She showed him the book Kazimir had given her, watched his eyes widen as he saw the moving images within. And then Kazimir himself arrived, announced by a very flustered butler who couldn't quite explain how the visitor had gotten past the locked front door. Edmund Thorne was a practical man, a merchant who had built his fortune through shrewd deals and careful risk assessment. When faced with a demon lord in his study, he did not faint or rage or call for guards. Instead, he poured 3 glasses of his best brandy and sat down to negotiate. "You want to marry my daughter," he said, his tone the same he might use to discuss a shipment of grain. "I do," Kazimir confirmed. "Why?" "Because she is remarkable, and I would like remarkable people in my life." Edmund turned to Rosalind. "And you, what do you want?" It was, Rosalind realized, the first time her father had asked her that question directly. He had always assumed he knew what was best for her, had always acted out of love but without consulting her desires. "I want to see the world," she said. "I want to learn and discover and experience things beyond these city walls. I want a partner who respects me as an equal, not a husband who sees me as property. And I think I might be able to have that if I'm brave enough to take it." Edmund was quiet for a long time, studying first his daughter, then the demon lord who sat calmly in his study as if this were a perfectly normal business meeting. "Adeline wanted you to be a lady," he said finally, speaking of his late wife. "No," Rosalind said gently. "Mother wanted me to be happy. She wanted me to have choices she never had. This is a choice, Father. Perhaps not the one you expected, but it's mine to make." Edmund drained his brandy in one swallow and set the glass down with a decisive click. "Very well, but I want a proper contract, drawn up by lawyers, ensuring my daughter's safety and rights. And I want visiting privileges. I'll not lose my only child to some distant realm with no hope of seeing her again." Kazimir inclined his head. "Both requests are entirely reasonable. I would suggest quarterly visits, alternating between your world and mine. As for the contract, I'll have my advisors work with your lawyers to draft something that protects Rosalinda's interests." "And a proper wedding," Edmund added. "Adeline would want that, something that honors both your traditions and ours." "Agreed," Kazimir said. Rosalind felt tears prickling at her eyes. "Father." "You're so much like your mother," Edmund said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Brave and stubborn and full of dreams too big for this small city. I've been trying to keep you safe, to give you what I thought she wanted. But you're right. She wanted you to be happy. If this is what makes you happy, then I'll not stand in your way." 3 days later, as promised, Rosalind gave Kazimir her answer. They stood once again in the palace gardens, though this time by invitation rather than stolen moments. The Silvercrest nobility had been abuzz with rumors of the mysterious foreign lord who had danced with the merchant's daughter, and Kazimir had used their curiosity to secure a proper introduction to the diplomatic circles. "Yes," Rosalind said simply. "My answer is yes." Kazimir smiled, and it transformed his face from handsome to breathtaking. He took her hand and knelt before her in the garden, under the same stars that had watched their first conversation, and kissed her hand as he had at the ball. But this time, when his lips touched her skin, she felt the warmth of magic, the sealing of a promise that went deeper than any human contract. "Then allow me to do this properly," he said, and slipped the dark ring onto her finger. It sized itself to fit perfectly, the red stone catching the starlight. "Rosalind Thorne, will you be my consort, my companion, my partner in the strange adventure that is existence?" "I will," she said, and felt her life transform in that moment, felt doors opening to possibilities she had never dared imagine. When the news reached Lord Julian Hartwick that Rosalind Thorne was engaged to a powerful foreign lord whose wealth made his family's holdings look like poverty, he raged and blustered and threatened. But he did nothing. The memory of Kazimir's grip on his arm and those burning eyes in the darkness kept him silent. The wedding was held 3 months later, a spectacular affair that blended human and demon traditions in ways that would be talked about for generations. Edmund Thorne walked his daughter down an aisle lined with flowers that bloomed only in the obsidian reaches, their petals like captured starlight. The ceremony was conducted by both a human priest and one of Kazimir's advisors, a demon who appeared as a dignified scholar with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. When Kazimir lifted Rosalind's veil and kissed her for the first time as her husband, she tasted magic and promise and the beginning of a grand adventure. The girl who had been laughed at for her clothes at a ball disappeared that day, and in her place stood a woman who would become legend, the human consort of the Demon Lord, the bridge between worlds, the scholar who would catalog the wonders of a dozen realms and write books that would change how humans and demons understood each other. But that night, as Kazimir led his new wife through a portal that shimmered like heat haze, into the obsidian reaches that would be her new home. Rosalind was simply a woman who had chosen to be brave, who had looked at the life laid out before her and dared to reach for something different. The last thing she saw of her old world was her father, standing in the portal's light, tears on his cheeks but pride in his eyes. And the first thing she saw of her new world was a palace carved from black stone that gleamed like glass, set against a sky where 3 moons hung in impossible colors, and she knew that she had made the right choice. Kazimir watched her face as she took in the sight of his realm, her realm now too. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Rosalind squeezed his hand and smiled. "Show me everything," she said. And he did.